afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Making It Work, a workplace game changer. I'm Courtney Spencer, Vice President of Advertising for the Portland Press Herald. Today, our business projects editor, Carol Coultas, will be moderating a panel discussion on how managers retain employees, assess productivity, and maintain confidentiality and security with a hybrid workforce. I know this is a topic many of us are spending a lot of time thinking about, and we're pleased to add to this conversation. Before we begin, however, I would like to take a moment to thank our generous sponsors for their support of our program. Thank you to Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, MEMIC, Cross Insurance, and Katahdin Trust Company. Their support makes this programming possible. And now I want to welcome Tony Payne from MEMIC to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Courtney. And MEMIC's really pleased and proud to be an ongoing sponsor for this series because it reaches so many small businesses, particularly that are challenged, not necessarily having things like HR and training all in-house. It becomes a multi-faceted responsibility. We speaking of small businesses, we insure over 18,000 main employers and around about 200,000 of their employees. Which is a daunting challenge, but one which also has to really revolve around safety and training. And these are the kinds of opportunities as we think about hybrid workforce and how do you bring people back to work safely, many of whom may have actually gone rusty in some of their safety skills. That's a topic for discussion that this group, I hope, will be able to address today, as well as you as employers, because it is so important that as we return, we do so very successfully. So thank you again, all of you. Courtney, it's great to see you, and Carol and Kim and the rest of the team. Enjoy this really robust discussion about how do we take what we learned forward and also refresh what we've known from the past.
Thank you, Tony. With that, we'll turn it over to Carol and her panelists. We hope you enjoy.
Thank you for being here, everyone. It's interesting. I looked up, just a year ago, we were holding Making It Work sessions on the topic of how do you establish a remote workforce? How do you make sure people are working in a safe environment? How can you assess productivity? And how do you maintain company culture with people working from all of their own locations? And here it is a year later. And the state's vaccination rate is at 65% of all eligible Mainers. In 6 days, the governor will lift the emergency order, and things are starting to look a little more normal. And it begs the question for business managers, what are you going to do? Are you going to maintain a remote workforce? Are you going to ask everyone to come back? Or are you considering a hybrid model? And all of those situations come with their own issues and their own considerations. And luckily, we have three really terrific people here today to help us unpack those issues. So I'm going to introduce our panelists, and we're going to chat for the next 35 or 40 minutes, and then we're going to open things up to questions from the audience. So let me introduce our panelists. First, it's Matt McGrath, who's the president and CEO of Systems Engineering. He's worked in the IT industry for over 20 years, including 13 years with WEX, where he led efforts in the company's project management office. He directed the New Zealand development arm of the company, and he led software development branch for the Americas. Matt joined Systems Engineering in 2013 and was promoted to director of engineering a year later. In 2017, Matt became the company's third president in its 33-year history. And Systems Engineering is interesting because it's an employee-owned company. And so I think Matt brings a very kind of specific awareness and sensitivity to things like decision-making that's fair and across the board. Matt received his BA from Clark University. He majored in Spanish, and his Master of Education from the University of Maine in Orono. He's one of those liberal arts guys who's made it in the tech world. Also joining us is Kim Anania. She is the president and CEO of KMA Human Resources Consulting. She founded that company in 2007 to provide businesses with practical HR advice and guidance. She specializes in all aspects of human resources and organizational development, including HR information systems, conversions, federal and state compliance, benefit management, recruiting, retention, safety, workers' comp, employee relations, coaching, and training. She earned a certificate in organizational development through the National Training Labs in Alexandria, Virginia, and she holds a Bachelor of Arts in History and American Studies from Muhlenberg College. She's also a member of the Society for Human Resource Management. And I have to say, for the last 7 years, when I've been organizing these B2B forums, I go back to KMA often because I have found their consultants to be really smart and articulate and very approachable. So, so I'm grateful for having that resource. And finally, we have Michael Busher, an employment attorney at Drummond Whitsom. He has extensive experience advising private and public entities on the full spectrum of employment matters, often leveraging his experience as a negotiator and litigator. So you can go one way or you can go the other. He regularly represents employers in connection with compliance with federal and state employment laws. He has also developed a specific expertise advising cannabis-related businesses. He is routinely consulted by employers of all sizes from all industries for help tracking difficult employment situations, including discrimination, wrongful discharge, wage hour issues, and discipline. He represents employers in arbitration before federal and state administrative bodies such as the EEOC Commission and the Maine Labor Relations Board, as well as federal and state courts. And he holds a BA from Wesleyan and a law degree from Fordham. So welcome to you all. And let's get the ball rolling here. With lessening COVID restrictions, many business managers are grappling with decisions about returning to the office. So how should a manager prepare for making that decision? I'm just trying to get into the mindset of folks and like where they should be coming from in terms of making that decision. In our pre-interviews, 2 of you talked about how this is really a great opportunity to listen to staff and to their concerns. So I wonder if we could start with that question. And how about Kim, if I ask you to begin that, please?
Sure, thank you. Just want to say thank you for having me, and it's just wonderful to be able to present with Matt and Mike and have you be our moderator, so thank you for that. To answer your question, I think we're getting questions all the time actually trying to predict the future, and so I would say the answer to this question is a lot about mindset. And do you think, we get asked all the time, do you think that this is going to be a permanent thing? Is hybrid permanent? Are we ever going to go back to work? And I think it's very individual. And as we are getting more vaccinated and people are feeling safer and more comfortable, I think it's a very individual answer for whatever company and what they do. So I think there's a big piece around mindset. I think there's a shift in that the work is not a place. It's what people do. And if we kind of go back to that, it's a good way to say, does it matter where we are? I think another area to answer that question is that in the mindset, you really need to figure out the safety of the employee and what is safe for them. Being home, being in an office, everybody has individual circumstances that we can't assume we know about. And I know, speaking to many of our clients and their employees, that's still a big concern for them, is the safety. So ensuring that. I think you have to really think about the dimensions of a hybrid situation or a full-time in the office or full-time remote. We're seeing a lot of clients change, and Mike, maybe you can chime in on this. We're seeing a lot of our clients sort of change what an employee is. They went from full-time now to more project work or part-time, or it could even be looking at different time zones and figuring out when do you communicate. Oops, I think we might have lost Carol, but I'll keep going. And then there's a whole piece about communication and just being transparent with employees because they want to know, and as transparent as you can be, the more authentic. And I
I
think,
think I just came back.
okay, hi, Carol.
Sorry about that.
That's
I
okay.
haven't had this problem before, so.
I've just been babbling on, so don't worry.
Well, how about Matt? Would you like to jump in on that question? I know you were one of the who said this really is an opportunity for people to listen to their employees and help frame how to approach making this decision.
Yeah, so I would echo what Kim said first, which is that I believe that the right answer is different for every company, right? There are so many different factors that drive that, whether it's culture or type of work. There are many roles that we tend not to talk a lot about that require that people be in the office. We tend to get really focused on these remote office settings, but the reality is most of us still live in at least a slightly hybrid, if not totally hybrid world where some people have to meet every day. So I think anything you do, you got to really keep in mind your entire population. The thing I think is one of, the opportunity I think we all have. There are a lot of opportunities here, right? And I think different businesses have approached those opportunities differently over the course of the pandemic. As it relates to employees, though, one of the things I have to keep telling myself is they were the ones who made this successful, right? So the whole world migrated back to a different work environment. And it wasn't because I and my management team went and did a great job every day. It was because the people who made that change were willing to make the change. They bought in, they did what they needed to do. And so I think in addition to all the other reasons we should listen to our employees, the fact that they've shown us the way, for me, is just all the evidence we need, right? So they need to be fundamentally involved in the discussion from where I sit. I think the other thing that's really important for us as leaders, often it's easy for me to feel like I should have all the answers because I have this title next to my name. But the truth is, I don't know. This is unprecedented, right? Nobody's ever returned to work. Certainly not at a time where we've had technology that's enabled all of this functionality and all this productivity. So we have a lot of questions that we don't have a great guide for. And as leaders, I think it's tempting to fall into this place where you think, well, I alone have to come up with this answer. And there again is another great opportunity to really enlist the voice of the people, I think. Now we're 100% employee owned, so I have another obligation to listen to the people, but we're also a high performing, corporation with high standards for work and all those other things, just like every other company. So, but fundamentally, at the end of the day, what we're talking about here is the people who do the work really should have a pretty big say in how that happens, because among other reasons, they've earned it. So that's really, I don't want to come across as preachy at all because I'm learning like everybody else, but that's our approach, which has really been to say, listen, there are a lot of people out there who have really earned this right to be a core part of the decision, and let's listen to what they have to say.
I think to follow up on that, Matt, there's a fair amount of compromising that happens on both ends, right? And that's how you make it work, which is great.
Oh, Carol, you are muted.
I switched to my phone hoping that I would have a more stable connection. So can you hear me now?
Yes.
We can.
Great. So Mike, would you like to hop in on this conversation too? I'm curious what you have to say about being in the right headspace for making this decision.
So I think I echo what Kim and Matt have said. I think this is an opportunity. And one of the things that I'm talking with a lot of clients about is messaging, right? And also honesty. I think in the past, we have taken it for granted that work looked a certain way. And like Kim said, now work is more of this thing that we do, not necessarily where we are. And so as employers are looking at what is it going to look like going forward, this is the opportunity to reassess what is essential, right? What do we need? A lot of the talk in our firm right now is about the glue, right? So it's not so much the presence, right? But it's what connects people. And if we are going to be in a hybrid workspace, how do we continue to create those connections? But I think the thing that I'm seeing the most right now is that as employers are discussing this, and a lot of people are looking to this sort of idea of maybe it's September 1st. I know the governor's lifting things June 30. The messaging of what we ultimately decide is crucial, right? And I think what I mean by that is we can accidentally snatch defeat from the jaws of victory just in how we communicate with employees, right? And so that's a lot of the discussion. Get honest with yourselves about what you do need. And like Matt said, there are some positions they need to be in the office, right? There are certain things that you need to do to keep things running, but also to keep that connectivity. And if that's the case, that's okay. But how you communicate that is going to make a big difference, right? So for example, if your communication is, just so you know, when you're working at home, you're not on vacation, right? That's not what you mean, right? What you really mean is we appreciate you, right? And like Matt said, it's because of you that we are where we are. And we recognize that as employees, you have gained these efficiencies that are invaluable to us. And we want you to continue those. We also have some things that need to be done here. So here's how we're going to do that. And going forward, this is what we're going to do coming back. And I think that is the big piece. Whatever you decide as an organization, it is unique. But then how you communicate that is going to determine what happens going forward. And that appreciation piece, like Matt said, and Kim, like you've said, we wouldn't be here if not for our employees, right? And it's not because of what we did at this high level, it's because of the buy-in of these awesome people who work for us. And so as we continue to move forward together, I take this as the opportunity to say, okay, what is really important? What do we need to be here for? What did we kind of do before that we really had no reason for doing? And we're going to be okay letting that go, right? And the last thing, just because it's coming up now, before we had the luxury of lumping employees in as a group, right? And I don't think many employers looked too hard at the unique attributes of what each position was. It was much easier to say, for example, all administrative assistants are in this group of people, right? But now, as we move forward, it may be that we actually have different kinds of administrative assistants that do different things. And so for one person, the requirements may be a little bit different than another. It's okay to do that. But that's different than what we've done before. So it is an interesting time.
So it's more like you're looking at the individuals as opposed to the job titles. Is that what you're saying?
Or we may actually need a few more job titles, right? So there may be people who are in a group together, no problem, right? But just because we said before, all of these people who were kind of doing the same thing were in a group together, now that we're potentially looking at, I'm assuming that a lot of people are going to be looking at a hybrid option going forward, right? And with that, we then grapple with this idea of, okay, what do we need to be together for? What do we need somebody in the office for? And if somebody's actual responsibilities require that, okay. But those responsibilities for one person may not be the same for the other. And so balancing that and just being okay re-examining that is really important right now. And I think that's actually how you're going to get the buy-in. So.
And if I could actually just follow up a little bit on that, because I think you're bringing up a great point. And I also think that as people start to come back to work, managers might assume that the skill sets that employee, whether they had been there for 3 months, 13 years, 20 years, are the same. And I think what's important for managers to understand is people learned a lot of new skill sets working remotely, and they may not need as much of this that they needed before, or that they needed before. So I think that reassessment is really important for each manager to do. But I also think, and this is sort of the approach that I have taken throughout my whole ownership of KMA and consultancy with my clients, is nothing's permanent. So let's do a trial period and see how it goes and reevaluate. And then we'll hear what worked, what didn't, and then we fix it. So I think that's a really important part as we start to reemerge, because there's a lot of anxiety of how is this going to be? And gosh, everybody knows how what you thought tomorrow changed for the next day and the next day and the next day. You get childcare issues and all of that. So you just have to be able to flow, communicate, follow through, and compromise, really.
So then let's take this to the next level. You all have an area of specialty, HR, legal, and security. So from your particular vantage points, what are the top 2 or 3 concerns that a manager should address when assessing whether to return to the office, maintain a totally remote workforce, or consider a hybrid of the two? I think that there would be different considerations for each of those scenarios. So what do you think? And Kim, since you have the floor, why don't you take that first?
Okay, I would say the 3 things would be location. Where are these people defining where they're actually going to be? Hours, what are their standard hours? The hours might not work for a mom who has kids at home, and working from home. So we might have to flex those a little bit. And then expenses and ensuring the ROI is there for whatever it might be. So those would be my top 3.
So you would analyze each scenario using those 3 benchmarks, those 3 frameworks? Okay.
I would, yeah.
Okay. And how about you, Mike? What would you say?
So interestingly, for me, in each one of these scenarios, what I'm grappling with most of our clients right now, aside from the messaging piece, is, I think Matt mentioned this a little bit earlier, people may have forgotten how to work or sort of communicate together. And so what I'm seeing in each one of these is you need to look at sort of what you need as an organization to be productive, recognizing that employees may have found new efficiencies. But I'm also recognizing that from an HR and specifically a sort of discipline employee workforce perspective, that employees may have forgotten how they're supposed to behave with each other, right? And so I would have expected that in our sort of remote environment last year to see a diminished amount of harassment and discrimination complaints. That has not been the case. In fact,
Really?
I think they've doubled.
Really?
Well, if you think about it, right? At some point, we were pretty good at establishing perhaps, boundaries between work and personal life, right? And then we were all thrown into this, and all of a sudden, we're all, instead of using our even work email, we're texting each other. And then over time, that becomes a sort of normal communication because by necessity it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, here we are moving back into sort of maybe, I hesitate to call it a more formal workspace, but I think we are. And with that, then the question is, how do we approach what has become sort of either ease of communication or perhaps bad habits, right?
Okay.
And so that is what I'm seeing in each one of these, no matter whether you choose to stay remote, to go hybrid, or to come back in person. Some of our, let's call them work manners, have slipped significantly. And so I'm finding, I'm actually doing a lot of training right now for employers just about reminders about communication, reminders about boundaries. I think a lot of people have let those blur in a good way because we needed each other when we were sort of all over the place and nobody knew what was going on. But now that we're coming back, part of it, even just from a management sort of supervisee perspective, your supervisee is not going to say, stop texting me, Michael, right? They're just not. That's for us to acknowledge, like, okay, now that we're in this space, is this still an essential form of communication, or can we shift back to the other piece? And I think that's something to look at no matter where you're at, which is in some ways we've all grown closer, right? But as a result of that, it's also meant that people at some point weren't able to say, like, I really don't like the fact that I'm getting a text message at 10 o'clock at night, right? So now it's time for us to take a look at, okay, what is necessary, what's not, and perhaps we should dial some of that back again. So
how do you advise a client on so for instance, in that kind of mode of communication, how do you advise a client that is embracing a hybrid workforce? So where texting is efficient in some situations, but not appropriate in others?
So for me, it's not so much the mode that is a problem. Although, so for example, in my work, to the extent that we are having confidential communications and things like that, I'm always thinking about, like, where are those? How do they exist? Do I have control of them, right? So that's going to be industry specific. But it's more this idea, I don't think texting is bad, but it goes back to what assumptions did we make before, and now as we move forward. So sometimes we address it from a policy level, right? Oftentimes that's a good way to do that. But the other thing is just from a realistic level, right? Which is, get honest with yourself. And should you be texting a supervisee who's not working at 9:30 at night, right? A text message is just way more intrusive than an email. And so that's that shift back, right? Before all this, you would have sent the email, but you got used to texting and, oh, I got this idea, let me text this, right? And so I think that's the shift, right? So it's not so much the text itself, but when and how we're doing it, and respecting that people do have lives outside of work. So
Great, thank you. And Matt, what is your advice for people who are, who need to be concerned about security issues, and they may be contemplating a hybrid workforce? So tell us what you think.
Yeah, so I guess what I would say is for any change to whatever you're doing today, the two things that I think are really critical right now for people to keep in mind, and these are significantly business impacting, both of them, right, are productivity and security. And one of the things that Michael touched on, I didn't necessarily name it the way I'm going to, but it's very similar, which is it's this sense of habits, right? So from a security perspective, what's true about me and everybody else on this call is that we are the weakest link in the security chain for our organization. So sorry to everybody, but you clicking on a link is the most powerful thing you can do to your company. So we remain that in that role. It's true of all of us, no matter how vigilant we are. And one of the things that's true about humans is that you create your habits based partially on your environment. And so when everybody did this really graceful transition to home, they had to create new habits. And part of that was, I'm in my home office and I'm doing certain things. And my initial reaction when I see an email, I've never heard of Carol before, she sent me a link, I'm not clicking on that thing, I'm going to delete it. There's a certain aspect of relearning everything you've had to learn. And it sounds really simple, but I'll tell you, the number of people who return to the office and change their behavior and forget some of the basics. And Michael talked about, being kind, being polite, being all these, your manners. Well, the same is true really of the entire employee experience. People are going to forget their badge. They're going to, all those things. They're also going to make decisions on the security side that are diluted because they're thinking about other things that are new as they're getting back into the office. So on the security side, that's a big deal. I would just say it's a great opportunity to reinforce for your user group some of the security awareness training. And it could be as simple as your manager just saying, hey, as you come back, please remember these things. It could be posting things in the hallway. There are a lot of different ways to do it. People already do it well. They did a year ago. They can do it again. And so that's a big one. The other one on the productivity side, look, I just got an email today from our internal, we provide IT equipment for the world, right? I just got an email today saying, hey, all these people coming in and out of the office is draining our supply of mice and, you name it, keyboards and all these things, because they now have 2 offices. Oh, right. So from a productivity perspective, I would recommend to everyone really think through those scenarios. And, a consistent theme we've had today is around communication and the clarity of communication. My experience is that people will do just about any reasonable thing you ask them to do, as long as you're clear and you have a good rationale for it, right? So I think the thing is, if you're asking people to bring their mouse with them, just be clear, and you got to sort of walk that walk yourself before you invite them back to the office, and just figure out, is it printing? Is it connecting to the network? Did you get a new laptop while you were gone? Did you change your password? The myriad of things that could take somebody like Michael, who needs to bill a certain number of hours. He's 5 hours waiting to get his PC up and running. So those are the 2 things I would say: security and productivity. And really both of those are very, very manageable by any of us. The question is, let's do a dry run of the day and let's be really clear in our communication back to the people. This is what you should expect. And don't be afraid. If the answer is you got to bring your mouse in, that's the answer, but let's say it. And otherwise you're going to be a half day with no productivity. And that of course impacts employee satisfaction.
Right. So, thousands of people changed jobs during the pandemic. And so there's a situation now where a lot of people are working and have never met their coworkers in person, which of course has an effect on company culture and other aspects of working for a particular employer. So I'm wondering, for folks who are considering a hybrid workforce, how do you bring a disparate workforce together, regardless of whether you're working from the same office complex? And Matt, I'm going to throw that question to you because you actually hired 32 new people during the pandemic, right?
We did. We really, so for us, part of the story is that we went from supporting, let's say, 400 customers who were generally kind of co-located in their own office building to 7,500 individual offices. So part of that was just purely the demand where we had to really ramp up. But the other thing that's really happened is Portland is enjoying a bit of a migration of technical folks, and we've been very fortunate to be a part of that. What I would say has worked for us is, and let me, first of all, I would say that we really thought long and hard about whether we were going to do any recruiting and onboarding during this time. That included the intern program as well as full timers. And the team really felt like, no, this is something we can do it well. And ultimately, it's now something that we're very proud of. And I think we've gotten better at both recruiting, hiring, and onboarding. But some of the things that have worked, look, what we believe is that, and this is something that's really a relatively new concept to me, honestly, but that we're all responsible for the success of these new employees. So what I mean by that is that if I interact with a new employee who I otherwise might not see very often or wouldn't have a reason to strike up a conversation, it's my job, just like it's everybody's job, to welcome that person in, give them context for what I do, make sure they know kind of how we might interact, but really bring them into the fold at every single opportunity. And that's a real culture thing, right? So if everyone believes that it's their responsibility to make that onboarding a success, then you're going to have a better chance of that going well. The other thing we do is we really kind of deeply immerse them with leadership, all the leadership team. We give a ton of time to the leadership team, to new employees. We have a really thorough onboarding process that actually, again, improved during this time. So I guess I would say, the key is find the people who you share values with. And as long as that's really there, then you're going to have a pretty good fighting chance in terms of how the rest of that onboarding goes. As long as you're living those values every day, which we try to do.
Cool. Mike, can you add to what Matt had to say about, establishing a workforce culture when you've got some people in the office and some people remote, and, trying to accommodate all of those situations?
Yeah, it's something that I'm having discussions with clients about every day at this point. And it's something that we as a firm have also been managing because we have continued to bring people on in the midst of all of this. And I think there's a couple things that I'm seeing that are helpful. And again, it's going to be organization specific, but like Matt said, it's really important to have regular communication. So one of the things that we're doing is making sure that, so for example, a group head is having regular communication with people who are newer, right? And it's not just communication about like, what's your workflow, what's your work? It's communication about how are you doing, right? And to have these touch points seems to be really helpful. The other thing that we've started to figure out is, I think we, and perhaps I'm speaking from the sort of professional perspective, but at some point, I think we had so many meetings and we weren't sure why we were meeting. And so we've really taken a hard look at when we are asking people to get together, what's the purpose of that? And sometimes the purpose is actually just to get together, but instead of having it be a fake purpose, it's the purpose of this is for us to check in, right? And to have it be efficient, to have it be at a sort of regular time. So for example, we have one that's at 9 o'clock every Monday. On 9 o'clock every Monday, everybody who is in my orbit gets together for a moment. And it's a, what are we doing? But also, how's everybody doing, right? And that little piece keeps us grounded as we then go off and do these things in different places. And the other thing that we've done, and that a bunch of people have done that I think is really working well, is having, I know it'll sound funny, but like it's essentially like a Zoom cocktail hour, right? And initially it was I was like, are you kidding me, right? But throughout all of this, it kept us connected, right? And it wasn't all the time, but everybody made the effort. And I think it goes back to what Matt was saying. It's about buy-in, right? So if we're gonna be in this hybrid or remote space, the buy-in has to be that when we are going to connect, everybody needs to make that connection in that moment a priority, right? Make it reasonable, right? Don't over-connect, because that drives us nuts, see us and our spouses, right? But again, it's really important. You can do it. You can create these things. You can be creative about it. Just realize that what it takes is everybody in that moment saying, this 30 minutes, once every 2 weeks, to connect with the people that I am doing all these awesome things with is a priority, right? And I think it's working, so.
Great. And what about you, Kim? What's your advice?
I think these guys have covered it, but there is sort of this enhanced need to take care of our employees personally, but also to ensure that they know what's going on with the business. So I found personally myself being at home and trying to take care of all my personal stuff. Sometimes I had to make sure that I was letting people know that KMA was still open, and we were still doubling in size as well, and all of those good things. So the over communication piece that we have been touching on all along has been really important. I think the other is, and we too adopted some happy hours as well. But I think how I would summarize that is as team rituals. And some of the new team rituals that we have done have been, as a whole company, every Wednesday morning from 9 to 9:30, we do a quick company update. We pick a new employee or existing employee who we don't know anything about, because half my team I still haven't met in person, and it's hard, right? And that is a half hour. And the other shift I was just going to say was, as a management team, I think pre-pandemic, many of the decisions happened at the management level. So for example, with this huddle that we do every Wednesday morning, there has been discussion, should we go bi-weekly with it? Should we go once a month? It's a lot of overhead for me to cover 50 people for a half hour, right? And I said, well, let's ask the employees. So I think that's sort of where the shift is going. And Matt, you've said it multiple times, as you have, Mike, that we don't necessarily need to make all the decisions anymore. Let's hear what people want to say. And if it aligns with the company's goals and success, then I think there's just even more value add to that. So that's kind of what I would say.
Okay, great. And we got a question with one of our registrants asking if you've had success with having group volunteer projects as kind of a way to, form good bonds with one another and establish a company culture. And so I just wonder, have any of you had any success with that?
I can just speak that the more success I had with that was during the pandemic, when we were truly remote and shut down, because people were really needing a way to connect. And so I would say that was where I saw a lot of it. Now that we're getting back, I'm seeing less of it. And a lot of it also depends on the passion around what that community effort is. Not everybody has the same passion, so it can be hard to suggest, but I think it's a wonderful way to bring a team together. And I think, this is a piece of the pandemic. You miss your community. That's a big piece of who we are, right? And so I'm a big advocate for it. And I think it's a great idea.
Good. So my next question has to do with, it's just remarkable, the competition right now for employees. And so I wonder, now that everyone has had more than a year of having great flexibility with respect to how they do their jobs, I wonder how important is workplace flexibility when you're trying to recruit and retain employees? Like, have the employees received more leverage as a result of this, and are able to use that to create more optimum situations for themselves? I'm just curious. It's really competitive out there. So how big a deal is workplace flexibility?
I could probably speak for Kim and Matt when I say huge.
Okay.
And I think that goes back to sort of what both of you guys have talked about, which is that sort of employee buy-in, right? And so part of that buy-in is revisiting how we hear employee voices, but also how we recognize at the end of the day, most people have, I'm pretty sure, found some pretty amazing efficiencies as part of this hybrid work process, right? And so it's not just, it used to be, I remember years ago, it was sort of like, come to Maine because it's the place to be, right? Well, now everybody can be in Maine and work for a Boston company, right? Can work for a California company. And so we have to look even harder at sort of that buy-in, because I do think it's the buy-in that keeps people invested, right? And to the extent that we're not just competing with the top main companies, we're competing with everybody.
Right.
So I think you have to listen, and you have to be aware of it, and you have to be really careful. And I use this quite often, right? Don't be Blockbuster, right? Don't think that you're right where you need to be, right? When Netflix comes to you, and Netflix right now, I think, is our employees, right? When they come to you with an idea, listen, right? Because that's what's going to help us continue to be competitive and successful, and to retain all of these awesome employees that we have.
Great. Anyone else?
If I could just add to that, I would say, what's true is that our future employees are listening to us right now, all of us, right? They're listening to how we respond to these situations. They're watching us navigate these challenging times, and they're making their decisions. And I'd say, I talked about out-of-state IT folks coming in. That's been a big boon for us. But really, if I look at the numbers, I think our biggest source of new employees comes from employee referrals. And so, you think about all those things in combination and how accessible information is these days. None of us can hide from this panel. We've said what we've said.
It's being recorded.
Exactly. So, so, this is all part of it, right? And these decisions and how we navigate these decisions really speak to the people that we know and the people we don't know yet. And so I just think, back to that, for me, it's a good reminder that I don't have all the answers. I do have to look externally for guidance there and listen to what they need. And I got to be assertive about what we need as an organization also. But let's make no mistake, our future employees, hopefully employees, are listening to us, and they're forming their opinion about us right now.
I just read a Wall Street Journal article, and a fact that jumped out to me was that 71% of employees who began working remotely during the pandemic said losing the flexibility was a source of anxiety when returning to the workplace.
Yeah.
So I think, I think it's been embraced, and to take it away that'd be tough. I think people would really have a really big issue with that. So one size doesn't fit all anymore. And I think flexibility is super, super, super important.
Great. Well, so let's start taking some questions. And we received 2 questions from registrants about this issue. And that is, Do you have any insight into optimal office configurations for a mixed workforce moving forward? And when looking at workspace design, is distancing of 6 feet the new norm for those who are returning to the office? So I think let's answer that question. And Kim, I'm going to start with you on that. And I'm also going to run and get my charger for my phone so I don't lose you a second time. So please, Kim, go right ahead.
Okay, I will jump right in. Well, the good thing is that we've got some wonderful resources with the CDC kind of sharing what parameters are. But yes, I do think the 6 feet is the safest way, but I also think the cleanliness is another piece to be considering. And I would call Lisa Whited. She'd probably love to hear that. She's a space consultant who has helped many, many companies transform their workspace to productive. And I'm sure she's super busy right now, but I think one size doesn't fit all either for each company, and you have to really pay attention to what the work is. I'm sure Michael has way more to say about that, so I'm going to turn it over to him.
Well, what I've learned through all of this is that I know nothing. Right. And what I mean is that in any given moment, the guidance changes, something is different. Right. But one of the things that I'm encouraging employers to do is not only to look at the space issues like you've talked about, but also actually to look at paid leave policies. This is really an opportunity for us. In January, the earned paid leave law went into effect. That has an impact on sort of hourly workers, also for professionals, although most professionals tend to have PTO. But the discussion that we've been having is we're now in a space where we need to give employees the ability to, when they are not feeling well, stay home, right? And I think there used to be this idea that, it was a badge of honor to come to the office and to, I'm deathly ill, but I am here, right? No, don't be here, right? Just do not, right? And I think that's the shift, right? But in order to make that happen, we have to also look at our policies and make sure that employees have that option, right? So space stuff for sure. And with respect to the CDC guidance, like I said, it is changing every day. We thought we had our feet underneath us, and then it changes again.
Right.
And I expect that over the next 2 months, it's going to change again. I can't tell you what it's going to be, but it is changing. And then, of course, just the last piece, the reality of sort of administration and the agency issues, right? OSHA just 2 months ago put out its new guidance for what we've been doing for 15 months. Right? So remember that whatever you're doing, there's going to be sort of competing information. It's going to be shifting. And then by the time those agencies catch up, it's 12 months later. So I take everything from that, like Kim said, like we look at space, I do think that is the safest piece, but also just making sure that employees understand that if they're not feeling well, for whatever reason, don't be here. We now have a different alternative. So.
Great. And Matt, do you have any advice to share?
No, I'm not going to top that. Thank you. I thought that was great.
Okay. So the next question I'd like to take is, do you have any thoughts on how to include field employees in the benefits of improved work-life balance that office workers are enjoying through hybrid options? So some of us can work from home and some of us have to be on the road. So any ideas there for how to offer more work-life balance options to field employees in this kind of new environment?
So I will say that one of the things that I know some employers are doing is essentially having a sort of home work day, right? So to the extent that you have employees who are in the field, building in a day where they're not, right? And that day where they're not is an opportunity for them to either be in the office or be sort of in that sort of hybrid space. So that's one thing that I've heard, especially with, I've worked with a couple of companies who have people who are researchers who are out at the field going to various locations. So they're being a little more deliberate about building in an additional day where they're not traveling and where they're able to then access that stuff from home if need be.
Cool. So Strawberry, can we queue up the first question from our live audience?
Sure thing. We've got a question from Patty. What do we use to measure productivity? There is a discussion about improved productivity, which should be measurable.
Yeah, I'll take that one. We've had a lot of those inquiries. We've had the discussions internally as well, but a lot of our customers, are looking for tools to help them gauge that. And I don't have a great answer if someone's looking for a tool. Honestly, we haven't found. I'm sure some exist. We have not found any that we love. But what I would say is that, what was initially, I really felt like we were going to have to measure our business and our productivity differently when we went remote. It was really validating to see that, after we got situated, all of the standard metrics around productivity, attendance, compliance, whatever the topic might have been, that's where we really started to trust the productivity shift. The productivity boost is when we saw those numbers really start to change. So, I think, that question starts some people thinking, do you mean Big Brother? Do you mean really like keeping them under your watch? Or do you mean just sort of being able to measure and understand what they did that day? And I think it's important for yourself to know where you sit on that spectrum. I think one of the biggest topics I've not heard us say too much yet, but is around trust, right? And I think the thing that's most notable to me is the amount of trust that's been earned and built over the last 15 months. And, I guess the only thing I would say for me personally as a guiding principle is let's honor that trust that was earned and leverage that as much as you possibly can, because that trust means a lot to the people on the other end of it. It really does. And for me, that's the keys to the kingdom in terms of the next level of relationship with the employees. And when they feel trusted and when they trust you, that's where it's at. And so I don't mean to suggest that question came from a Big Brother's perspective, but we have really kind of had conversations across the spectrum. But that's what we've said, we're going to measure the business the way we did before. We're going to take natural evolution of those metrics as we would if we were in the office. And we're going to do what we need to do. But fundamentally, that's where we really gained the confidence that we were more productive.
That's a great point, Matt, about trust. I think that strong organizations have been tested through the pandemic, and what has emerged is more respect and more trust for your coworkers, because for the businesses that have been able to navigate this successfully, they're coming out of it a stronger organization. So
can I just add one thing too, and I'll be brief, is to say the action also needs to be swift and decisive if there isn't compliance. If people aren't earning the trust, you got to deal with it. You can't let that fester, and you got to have enough of a visibility to know when that's happening. So I think it's really critical to the other trust piece we talked about, that when it isn't there or isn't earned, that you deal with it pretty much on the spot.
Mike or Kim, do you want to weigh in on the productivity question?
The only thing I would just add to what Matt said is remember that even before the pandemic, we always had, let's say, 3% of our workforce that was going to, the words I've heard are take advantage of the system or different things, right? People, and that hasn't changed, but don't judge everyone else based on this small percentage of employees that we've always had, right? And I think that's the messaging piece. Be careful about that because at the end of the day, I do believe that almost all employees care and are working really hard. And like Matt said, one of the things that we should do is when people are not being productive or there are performance issues, address them in the moment, right? Don't let it be. So a lot of what we're doing now is reestablishing baselines. That's okay. Be clear, be direct, move forward. These are the expectations, right? And deal with them when they're not met. But don't take that same group of people that I sort of suggest have always been there and then project that onto everybody else. So.
Good advice. Go ahead, Kim.
I was just gonna say, well said, Matt and Mike.
How about another question, Strawberry?
This one is in the same vein. Question from Stephanie. I recently heard something about employees may come back to the office feeling like they don't need to be managed anymore or at the same level. They've been doing it at home with little over-the-shoulder interactions. How do you see this impacting the return to work and the relationship between leaders and staff?
That's a good question.
I would take this one to say that, again, whether they are new or they've been with you a while, you've got to reestablish your norms, your expectations, and follow up with them, because the communication piece that has been a theme throughout this is the biggest piece, and it's the piece around they may have learned new skill sets, or they may want to learn new skill sets now that they have been away. And so as management, we need to listen to that. How does it help the company? What could you do to make us even better company? And is it the right time to be able to do that? Or what is the development skill set plan to learn that? So I think it's a really valid question, and something that every single leader needs to be not naive to think that employees are going to come back wanting more or something different.
And so you're back to listening, which was a point we made earlier in this conversation. Any thoughts from Matt or Mike on that?
I think it's really a question of, so look, here's my answer, is that if my managers have to do less kind of fine detail managing, then theoretically that frees them up to do more strategic work, bigger lifts, move the business forward. Yeah. I'm all for that. For me, that's really in keeping with a lot of what we're talking about, which is a more capable, more productive, more independent workforce. Awesome. That means some of those other roles, and Michael talked about earlier, are there more roles? Are there different names? What are they? Well, it may be that you now have a strategic ability and capability because of the time that's been freed up, and go ahead and use that. It's power. It's an asset.
Cool.
Yeah, and that to me that's a newfound efficiency. And I think part of what we talk about now is, not only is it for employees who are coming back, but for supervisors. So we may want to take that as an organizational opportunity to, like Matt said, so here's how we actually expect you to spend your time now too, right? You're welcome.
I think we have time for one more question, Strawberry.
All right, we've got a question from Ted. Can the panelists address the cultural impact of a remote and/or hybrid workforce? If staying hybrid, can you attempt to make in-person connections? If so, at the office or other locations?
So if you're trying to make a connection, you have a hybrid workforce and you want to make a connection with your employees, what's the best way to do that? Is that sort of the thrust of that question?
I think so. That's what I'm getting.
Okay.
I think we talked about that in some respects a little earlier, but I think it's that sort of buy-in piece, picking something that does work. So for me, I happen to be an avid mountain biker, and so I have invited groups of people to go with me. I like doing it, so I know I'm going to show up. But I think that's the piece too, right? Which is being creative. But having people be committed to, let's say, don't do it all the time, but when you're going to do it, it's sort of that we as a group are committed to doing that. And then just being mindful that people may have different ideas or different needs around that. So it is a new frontier, but I think there's a lot of opportunity. At the moment, I'm still going with outside activities are great. So.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that one? I wonder for, I think in-person activities now have taken on a whole new meaning because we've been apart from each other for such a long time. So would you recommend that employers think about over the course of the summer, maybe doing something like having a cookout or some sort of a social activity just for the purpose of bringing people face to face, if it's safe to do so?
Absolutely, but I just want to caution that there are still people who are very not comfortable doing that. And so that assumption, again, is just one to check and not to be upset if people don't come. But I do, just to wrap that question up, I think the use of technology is a good way, right? But not to overuse it, to Mike's point. So I read a t-shirt the other day, it was like, this Zoom meeting should have been an email. Right. So it's that kind of knowing the boundaries. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll say now, it's people always ask, do you want a Zoom or call? I'm like, a phone call is totally fine. My eyes are glazed over, right?
And you don't have to deal with hair and makeup either on just a phone call. So that's always a nice thing. So, well, I really appreciate the insights that all three of you have shared today. I apologize for the rocky start when Kim was talking about how we've learned new skills. I learned how to go from Zoom on my computer to Zoom on my phone. So I am hopeful that our audience got a lot out of today's conversation. I'm sure they have. It will be posted on the Press Herald landing page after the fact. And also, Kim has agreed to answer any questions that remain in the queue. If they're specific to HR advice. And so I would encourage you, if you're in the queue with a question, go ahead and send us an email and we will try to get that answer to you via email after the fact. So if we were in the Portland Public Library where we used to do our B2B business forums, there would be thunderous applause right now as I thank our panelists. So thank you very much. I really do appreciate it. And for our audience members, just letting you know, Making It Work is going to take a break over the summer, but we'll be back in September. I hope you'll join us then. And in the meantime, please enjoy the summer months. And I'm going to go rest my arms now. So take care, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye.
Carol.